Hello, welcome to another story by Grandma. This story today is about Rufus W. Holsinger. He was born the 22nd of February, 1865 in Chester County, Pennsylvania. He was my second cousin, 3 times removed, and a very interesting man by the sounds of it. He moved to Charlottesville, Virginia in the late 1880s and opened a photography studio. For the next 40 years, he photographed the people of Charlottesville, their businesses, their homes, their places of entertainment, and the events they observed. The result is a portrait of Charlottesville at the turn of the 20th century, preserved by his remarkable photographs. Through the eyes of the camera, the reader witnesses the tragic burning of the rotunda of the University of Virginia, the first airplane in Charlottesville, and the mass celebration of townspeople following the end of World War I. Holsinger Charlottesville is a book that looks back at the interesting and nostalgic era when the horse and buggy days began to travel side by side with the trolley car and automobile. There are over 80 photographs in the book, each one identified and narrated, as well as a brief history of this famous little town by the renowned local historian Bernard P. Chamberlain. Rufus Holsinger would never have been a photographer had it not been for a mistake which occurred while he was living in his native state of Pennsylvania. At the time he was teaching in Pleasantville Normal School, he developed a cough which was incorrectly diagnosed as tuberculosis. The only prescription for the disease was that he get plenty of fresh air and sunshine. In following this advice, he decided to turn his summer hobby, photography, into a profit-making profession. He began traveling in horse-drawn cart from town to town, taking graduation pictures at local schools. At his peak, he traveled through most of the East Coast pursuing his profession. However, sometime during the late 1880s, he passed through Charlottesville, Virginia, liked the town, and decided to stay. One reason for his decision was increased competition from other firms entering the photography business, particularly in the high-volume area of graduation pictures. The exact year Holsinger moved to Charlottesville is not known. However, it is known from receipts of the purchases still in existence that he bought the City Studio in 1887 and Wampler's in 1889. From that time until 1920, he photographed and preserved the people, places, and events of the Charlottesville area. By profession, he was primarily a portrait photographer. Some 80% of the surviving negatives are of his customers. According to his son Ralph, he photographed many notables, including Robert E. Lee, Lady Astor, and Theodore Roosevelt, who was president at the time. Unfortunately, many valuable negatives were lost in a 1910 studio fire. Of large significance are the approximately 2,000 negatives of building dedications, business openings, sporting events, and people engaged in the routines of their daily lives over a 40-year period. Some of these photographs were just part of his business. For example, during the height of his reputation, Rufus Holsinger was the official photographer for 6 different railroads and traveled great distances to photograph train wrecks. He was also chosen to make the photograph of Monticello that appeared on the original $2 bill. Aside from business, a great deal of his work was done for pleasure. Pictures of prim women on street corners and gnarled old men in ox carts would hardly have been subjects for profit-seeking business. Regardless of the exact reason behind his photographs, one thing is certain: it took considerable amount of effort and expertise to make them. Today, our technology has made it possible for anyone to take a photograph of reasonable quality with very little effort and practically no knowledge of the process. Such was not the case in the day of Rufus Holsinger. He entered the field of photography in its infancy. Despite the many obstacles which faced Holsinger and his fellow photographers, their photographs are some of the most beautiful ever made. The quality of these old photographs is partly due to the inherent qualities of the large wet plate negative, which was known for its unusual softness in tones of gray and almost grainless clarity. In addition to this, the extremely large negative size allowed a print with a degree of sharpness seldom seen today. Some of his negatives were as large as 14 by 17 inches. Aside from the techniques mastered by Rufus, his artistic treatment of his subjects is admirable. In both his portraits and historic renditions of Charlottesville, he exercised skill in posing and overall composition, which allow his photographs to be both dynamic and universal in their appeal. When this factor is added to the technical expertise and ability to manipulate his negatives in the darkroom to achieve the best possible effect, it is easy to appreciate the Holsinger collection in the more complex way. One story which does much to round out the existence of Rufus Holsinger as a turn-of-the-century photographer concerns the burning of the rotunda. Holsinger was attending church on that Sunday morning in 1895 when the fire was discovered. Upon hearing the news, he rushed to his cart and drove immediately to his studio. Once there, he loaded up his camera, prepared his negatives, and got to the fire just in time to photograph the rotunda just before the dome fell through. One must attribute the accomplishment, at least in part, to Holsinger's speedy thoroughbred horse named Dan, who was said to be so fast that Rufus had to put wire wheels on his cart because the horse traveled at such speeds that wooden spokes would shatter. Later on, he became one of the first citizens of Charlottesville to own an electric car. Rufus practiced his well-mastered craft into the 20th century, though he suffered from repeated ill health. In 1925, as he was recovering from a serious operation, he had a fainting spell and fell through the second-story window of his studio. Although a telephone wire broke his fall, he suffered a fractured skull and was unable to continue his profession. From that time until 1969, his son Ralph, whom he had trained since childhood, took over the operation of the studio. The photographs of Rufus Holsinger have provided us with a rare opportunity to see how Charlottesville and its citizens looked and lived over 100 years ago. Rufus died 8th of October 1931 in Charlottesville. He is buried in the Monticello Memorial Park in Albemarle, Virginia. This story was written by Barbara Ruscia, manager of the Holsinger Studio, for an introduction to the book Holsinger's Charlottesville, and revised by myself for this platform. Thanks for watching. That's all for today. And don't forget to subscribe. Goodbye.